we looked at our fundraiser as being pure profit, okay? And that's how I wanted us to look at it first, to just kind of understand that idea and seeing that we can just consider everything we're making as profit from the fundraiser, okay? Not taking into consideration what we spent on each object, and that's what Sean's question was about, and half the people in the class were with us and half the people weren't understanding what the difference would even be. So I wanted to clarify for that, okay? And so in your project, I was really specific about your business idea at the beginning, that you include your cost to produce, what you're going to sell it for, and then a column for profit, so that the language was very clear to you which one you would be using for your profit equation, okay? Because unless the scenario is very clear, you could interpret it both ways. And we're going to look at some mathematical ideas in this as well. So yesterday when we did this, we focused on our profit being everything from the fundraiser. Like the school gives us $500 to spend on supplies, and then our program just gets to keep all of the profit. So we didn't have to kind of pay for what we were initially getting, okay? And the amounts we came out with, according to this equation, looked like this, and correct me if I am wrong anywhere. You have it in front of you, right? So what I want you to do is just make a note that that was based on, okay, that the $500 we didn't have to account for spending it, okay, because that's kind of how I set up the scenario at the beginning when we were asked about it. Okay? But I want to address what other people were saying, because your scenario is going to be a little bit different, which is why I had you in your project to include what the cost is, what you're going to sell it for, and a different column to say your profit. So, for example, if the cost of me producing something is $3 and I'm going to sell it for $7, what's the amount of profit I'm making on that item? $4. And I said in the directions for your project, if you read it carefully in the Canvas, that I wanted you to include the profit column for your profit equation. So I tried to help clarify so it wasn't ambiguous in the situation to know, was the $10,000 a gift that I don't have to account for spending, or do I? And so you see here you're going to account for your cost and your selling and just get your profit from there. Okay? So what that would look like based on what we were looking at yesterday, we wouldn't do it just like how we did this one. We wouldn't just say, oh, it's all pure profit for us. We would have to consider what we were making on the deal, okay? So our equation yesterday said 30x because X was cases of candy bars, and we could sell them for $1, and there were 30 in there, so we said we'd make $30 from the case. If we had accounted for our cost in buying or producing the item, how would that change that part of our profit equation? What would it have been instead of 30x? What would we make off of each case of candy bars? I see Matt. I know that he knows. Helen? It would be 20x. Okay. Why did she reduce it by 10? Yes. No, well, so this one was about the candy bars. Raven? Because the box would cost us $10. So it's like we would make 30x, and then we would subtract 10x, because that's however many cases we buy. And so then that would give us 20x. Okay? All right, so how would our second profit margin be adjusted? So this was 50Y selling jar candles at $5 each, and there were 10 in a case. So it was $50 per case of jar candles. Eric? 10Y? Okay, so do you guys agree? So if it's 10Y, I'm saying I would make $50 off of each case. I would assume if it's 10Y that each case then costs me $40 to buy. How much did it cost to buy each case, Isabel? Or sorry, Monet? It cost. Okay, good. So it'd be 30Y. Is that okay? All right. So let's look at how that would change. So first of all, I want you to ask yourself, does it change any of this? Did any of the constraints change when we rewrote our profit equation? Okay, so I first want you to recognize that the constraints are independent from the profit, so that even if we changed our profit equation, that these points would still be the extreme points that we were looking at. It wouldn't change. Does that make sense? Because these are based on the constraints placed upon us, not based on how we're calculating our profit. Okay? Then if we plug these in to calculate profit, here we still get 0. Okay, that's not very surprising. Okay. What do we get when we put in 0.25? Yep. 750. What do we get when we put in 622? Sean? 780. And what do we get when we put in 13.30? You multiply 13.3 times 20. 266. Okay. So I want you to look carefully at the changes that took place. Okay. This didn't change at all. Is that surprising? This is like the situation where you're not doing anything. Why even consider it, right? We decided we're going to do something. What other trends do you see happening in the changes in the profit calculation? Okay, so I want you guys to look at those and think about what's going on. Mm-hmm. Okay, so both of these, the basic difference is subtracting the $500 we were looking at the beginning, because in both of those situations, they just spent the complete $500, right? Why does the 13.3, 0 not reduce by $500? Huh? Good. They didn't spend all of it at the beginning, okay? All they bought was 13.3 cases, whatever that means, right, of candy bars and no cases of jars of candles. How much was it again for a case of candy bars? $10. So if I bought 13.3 of them, theoretically, at $10, that would be $133. Did this reduce by $133? It did. Okay? So you can see the changes. So your project is going to be more similar to this model, okay? But I hope that I made that clear in the instructions by telling you that when you came up with your business idea, I didn't leave it vague, like just tell me, oh, the cost and the profit. What I said was tell me your cost, tell me what you're going to sell it for, then tell me your profit. And I even said base your profit or your objective function on that amount for your project. Does that make sense? Yes, Alex? Uh-huh. Absolutely. So Alex is saying instead of replugging everything back into a new profit equation, could you have just made these adjustments? Absolutely, if you understand those adjustments. So the things I wanted to point out by doing this was I wanted you to understand that these things are not going to change. Okay? So even if you had the wrong, just your profit equation was wrong in your project or whatever the case may be, if all of your restrictions and your calculations for those were correct, you should still have the same feasible region with the same vertices along the quadrilateral. Okay? And yes, these will adjust by here. But what you would get wrong if you didn't explain it thoroughly is your model for your profit. So the reason for doing it like this and not doing it this way where you have to subtract something at the end is if I want to model the profit for my business for somebody, I want to be able to tell them in the simplest and most concise terms, here's how you're going to calculate your profit for the business. So this is pretty simple and concise. They just have to do this multiplication and addition. If I do it this other way, what I have to tell them is, well, you're going to do this, but then you need to go back and subtract the amount you spent, which isn't constant, right? It depends on what you bought. So that's a lot of explaining. It's not all summed up in one equation. It's one equation plus some things you have to go figure out on your own and then subtract. So do you see why this would be a better model to describe it as far as if you were like presenting it to somebody? This would be simpler to them than having to explain the mathematics to them. But as math students and people who are going to see all these great connections, okay, from like Algebra 1 through up through what we're learning today, we want to see the connections of how the numbers are working and understand why each of these just decreased by that amount. It's important that we understand that. If we're going to present something to somebody as a model of profit, you would probably want to present it to the person in a way that would be simplest for them to understand. Okay?